The drawer was still open when Ruth called everyone into the living room, her voice tight in the particular way it got when something had disrupted her sense of order. The cash she kept for holiday tipping, the mail carrier, the trash collectors, a few neighbors, was gone. $40, maybe $50, not a fortune, but enough, apparently, to require an immediate verdict. "Your sister would never," Ruth said, looking at Elise before anyone had asked a single question. "It had to be you." Walter nodded beside her, the small automatic nod of a man agreeing with a decision he hadn't actually examined. Camille was already reaching for her phone. "I'll just type something up," she said, not unkindly, already composing an apology for the family group chat, one Elise was apparently expected to send under her own name. "It'll smooth things over faster if we handle it now before everyone starts asking questions." Elise stood there for a moment, taking in the strangeness of watching her own confession being drafted by someone else. For something she hadn't done, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't storm out. She simply said, "Give me 1 minute before anyone signs anything." To understand why she said that and not something louder, it helps to look back 3 days earlier. Camille had texted her that Tuesday, casual and quick, the way sisters text about small things that don't feel significant at the time. She'd needed cash for a last-minute gift and had borrowed some from their mother's drawer, planning to replace it before Christmas. She asked Elise not to mention it to Ruth, framing it as no big deal, the kind of favor between sisters that happens without much thought. Elise had agreed. Not because she loved keeping secrets, but because raising it with Ruth felt like more trouble than it was worth, over what amounted to a small, temporary loan. She hadn't thought about the message again until this exact moment, standing in the living room, watching herself get cast, once more, as the family's default explanation for anything that went wrong. It wasn't the first time. Elise had spent years occupying a specific role in the family's internal story, the one who asked more questions, who pushed back when something didn't sit right, who required more explanation before accepting things at face value. None of that had ever amounted to actual wrongdoing. But somewhere along the way, being the more complicated daughter had quietly become interchangeable, in her parents' minds, with being the less trustworthy one. Camille's agreeableness, meanwhile, had earned her the benefit of the doubt in nearly every situation, simply because she made fewer waves. Elise pulled up the message on her phone. She didn't add commentary, she didn't frame it as a defense. She simply read it aloud, evenly, the way she'd read a line from any ordinary document. "I took 40 from Mom's drawer. Don't say anything, I'll put it back before Christmas." The room went quiet in a way holidays rarely allow, for Camille's face changed first, not anger, but the particular stillness of someone realizing a private moment had just become very public. Ruth stared at the phone as though it might resolve itself if she looked at it long enough. Walter opened his mouth and then closed it again, clearly recalculating something he'd accepted too quickly minutes earlier. What is this?" Ruth finally asked, though the message had already answered the question for her. Elise didn't respond with satisfaction. She simply waited, letting the silence do the work she didn't need to. It was Ruth who eventually asked the question that should have come first, well before any accusation had been made. "What actually happened?" she said quietly, "with the money?" Camille answered honestly this time, the pretense gone. She'd borrowed it, planned to replace it, and hadn't yet had the chance. She admitted with visible discomfort that she'd let the accusation against Elise go further than she should have before saying anything herself, caught in a moment of not wanting to be the one who had to explain. Walter, for his part, admitted something quieter but no less important. He'd agreed with Ruth's assumption almost automatically, not because he had any real reason to suspect Elise, but because agreeing had simply been easier than pausing to consider an alternative. Ruth didn't offer a sweeping apology or a dramatic reversal. She sat with the discomfort for a moment, the particular discomfort of realizing a pattern rather than a single mistake. Then she asked Elise directly, for what may have been the first time in years, how long she'd felt like the family's automatic explanation whenever something went wrong, Elise considered the question honestly rather than rushing to fill the silence with reassurance. "A long time," she said. "Long enough that I stopped expecting anyone to ask before deciding." It wasn't an especially dramatic answer, but it landed with real weight precisely because it was true, and because everyone in the room recognized, at least partially, that it was true. Camille apologized properly later that afternoon, once the initial shock had settled, not performatively but with real discomfort, at how easily she'd let someone else absorb the consequences of her own small mistake. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. It was smaller than that, and more honest for it. Elise didn't need a victory lap. She hadn't read that message to win anything. She'd simply reached a point where continuing to accept blame that wasn't hers, quietly and repeatedly, no longer felt like the easier path. What stayed with her longest wasn't the vindication itself, but the quieter realization underneath it. That families, like any group of people who've known each other a long time, can build entire narratives about who someone is, and rarely think to check those narratives against the facts, until something finally forces them to look.